Topic today is about getting the most out of your daily stand-ups. My name is David Heiberger, and it's an honor to be here with everyone. A little bit about me. I've been at a few companies before. It's a small sampling. Also have a few certs under my belt. And also just about me in general, the daily stand-up actually has a special meaning to me. When I first started my Agile career as a product owner, as a new product owner working for a Fortune 500 company, I had a brand new Scrum Master, very fortunate, very passionate, very dedicated, but he was very much by the book, and that was not allowing the discussions I needed to take place during the daily stand-up. And so I'm really excited about some of the changes that Scrum.org has changed, and we're going to talk about that. And I think that would have definitely helped me back in my earlier career, and I think it would help everyone even today as well. So I'm really pleased and excited for this topic. To get the most out of this, I do ask that everyone, feel free to speak up. Any questions, comments, concerns, please raise your hand. We're all one community here. And I suggest, I'm going to maybe for some of you talk about things that you might not have considered before. I do suggest you keep an open mind as well. Let's actually set the groundwork for why we're talking about this and why we may want to revisit the daily stand-up. So let's take a little sneak peek into someone's thoughts about Scrum, which includes, of course, a daily stand-up. Hold on.
Annoyingly efficient.
Can everyone hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Are they producing working software without your constant intervention? Have you struggled to micromanage every minute of their day? Fear not, for Scrum is here to solve all these problems you never knew you had. With the rigorous application of Scrum here at the Knoll Labs, we've ensured that our engineers have less time for coding and more time for meetings. That's right, wave goodbye to productivity and welcome an endless cycle of meetings that ensure your productivity. Scrum lets you micromanage every aspect of your team through something we like to call buzzword Stockholm Syndrome, or BS for short. This technique makes your engineers docile and so entrenched in your time-wasting processes that they will vigorously defend it. Step 1 involves bombarding your teams with new buzzwords daily to maintain a perpetual state of confusion. Here are some handy BS terms you can start using today. Backlog, burn down, burn up, and burn out charts, backlog grooming, retrospectives, definitions of dumb, time boxing, empiricism, forecast, velocity, lean software, story points, planning poker, and more. Trust me, it's gonna be.
They introduced a new term today, hyperproductive lag. None of us knows what it means, but have been assured it will boost our productivity.
Scrum turns your engineers into perpetual meeting attendees rather than focusing on actual work to ensure peak productivity. From sprint planning to stand-ups, retrospectives, and backlog grooming, Scrum ensures your engineers are constantly exerting effort without doing any tangible work. Worried about burnout? Don't be! To avoid burnout, we turn sprints into marathons where our engineers run full tilt into the next sprint. It's about keeping their undivided attention focused on making it to that next meeting so they don't realize how miserable they truly are.
They call it a sprint, but every time you reach the finish line, they move it. It's more like being chased by a horde of zombies. You can't stop or the process will eat you.
You know you've done your job correctly when your developers never stop sprinting. Scrum is based on the Agile Manifesto, much like how a hot dog is based on the concept of meat. Scrum promises you flexibility by encasing your team in a rigid exoskeleton of ceremonies, roles, and processes. This makes Scrum a perfect tool for transforming your quick, bug-hunting velociraptor engineers into a herd of bureaucratic stegosauruses slowly trudging towards water. Individuals and interactions?
Overrated! Scrum replaces all that messy creativity with sweet process structure and estimations. Because nothing screams innovation like a 15-minute stand-up where everyone recaps yesterday.
Outside of your stand-ups, your engineers can engage in a thrilling game of planning poker, where the stakes are high and the numbers mean absolutely nothing at all. And while you can't define what the numbers mean, you have to ask yourself, how does your number define you? Remember working software over documentation? Oh yes, those were the good old days. Thanks to Scrum, we have taken this even a step further with methods to ensure you have working software. Testing. Nope! We refocused on what truly matters, documenting our process, because if it's not in Jira, did it really happen? Customer collaboration over contract negotiations? Who's got time for that? In the Scrum world, we enjoy the thrill of collaborating with our customers by selling them features we haven't even started. May the best lawyer win. In Scrum, our sprints are sacred. The only change of plans we accept is adding more to our plan. Deviate from the sprint and miss a story point? You can plan on another meeting to explain why you didn't meet your goals you made while playing a friendly game of planning poker. Holding to these 2-week plans lets your superiors forecast and guarantee the features your company is going to release for the entire next 12-month period, with the precision of groundhogs predicting the total precipitation over the next 3 months. So if you're ready to transform your agile velociraptors into process-laden stegosaurus, embrace Scrum. Because why have simplicity when you can have complexity disguised as efficiency?
So, oh, hold on. If you were to ask your team members, how many of them would actually feel that resonates quite well with them?
Or will it resonate?
So if you were to show that video to them, would the team members say that I feel like what that video is saying, I feel like most of it applies to my work environment?
Agreed. Yes.
Anybody else? Agreed.
I completely agree.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yep, I would agree as well.
Okay. Now, why do you think that's the case?
I think that
Anyone?
video is it's hit a lot of key points, and we did feel that way in our teams that that it was just one meeting after another, and some of the other points he covered as well.
And do you feel like the process controls you instead of you controlling the process, maybe?
Definitely.
Any other thoughts that video created? Okay.
I guess
Besides a
not.
lot of terminology,
I'm sorry?
besides a lot of terminology.
Yeah, Avi did a really good presentation during the last conference. We talked about how we really should get away from using agile terminology and use simple plain English. I really love that presentation, and this video also drives that home as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. There we go. Hold on. There we go. So in 2020, Scrum.org changed the daily stand-up. What's funny is I've done this presentations quite a few times, and it seems like no one's ever heard of it. So I think Scrum.org, beautiful, great organization. I think they just need a better PR and marketing department. Let's go ahead and take a look at that itself. So again, Scrum through the Scrum guides. It talks about 2020 Scrum.org's the revision. So it says, number one thing it says it's even less prescriptive. So in 2020, now 5 years ago, they made the Scrum guide even less prescriptive. So for example,
David, are you showing us, because we're not seeing the Scrum guide?
you should see the revisions. It should say scrumguides.org/revisions at top.
But you're not showing it. You're not clicking on that.
We just see the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, I thought you were
on.
trying to show us the guide itself.
Hold on. Yeah, I thought it was. So let me try one more time. Oh, you know what I think I did? I think I shared the PowerPoint. I didn't share the screen. Let me share the screen. How about now?
There we go. We got it.
All right. Thank you for speaking up. I really appreciate that.
Okay, no problem.
So in 2020, number one thing they did is they talk about being less prescriptive. So the guide's less prescriptive overall. And they said, by removing or softening prescriptive language. For example, they removed the daily Scrum questions. So the daily Scrum questions are what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today, and any blockers. So with today's presentation, it says, okay, if those questions go away, and I've been in tons and tons of daily stand-up as an Agile coach and also as a product owner myself. And if you got rid of those questions, I suspect a good portion of the teams wouldn't know what to talk about otherwise. So if you remove those questions, what would be a daily stand-up is? And that's what our presentation is all about. And again, this is 5 years ago. And even today, when I sit there and talk to people, I get pushback, even with people I'm consulting, companies I'm consulting with, saying, no, we don't think we want to step away from those. So it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic into place. Let's get back to the deck.
Sorry, David, I didn't understand. So are we saying like that's not what we should be saying? Like, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And that's it?
Correct. That's what, so yeah, so if I go back to that slide right here, if you actually look at the Scrum guide, they actually got rid of those 3 questions. And so with this presentation, go ahead.
I was gonna ask one more thing. Did they suggest something else or they're just leaving it to the team?
Well, it talks about the concepts to cover, and I'll talk about that as well. And what the beautiful thing is, what this entire presentation is about is, okay, if we remove the questions, what do we do instead? So you came to the right meeting. You're curious about what to do, this is the meeting for you.
But people are still asking those questions.
I know. Last time I did this presentation just 3 months ago, some Scrum Masters even said, well, I'm going to keep doing those questions with my pod because that's the level of maturity they're at. I don't think it's a level of maturity thing. I think it's just a mindset going into it. There's a larger discussion going on. Go ahead.
I think people are just accustomed to saying it. It's just a level of familiarity. And it's 3 easy questions to ask, and people understand the question. So I would love to know the reason behind removing it, if that's what you're going to explain.
Well, I kind of just did. So let me go back and look at this. And the reason why, well, they say, right, to be less prescriptive. They're going to stop telling you how to do things and start talking to you about what is the overall goal. So we will talk about what is the goal. If you do a daily stand-up or daily Scrum, as scrum.org says, when you do the daily Scrum, why do the daily Scrum? And we'll talk about what they recommend you try to achieve. And then we'll talk about that. And we're also going to talk about, to get what you're trying to achieve, this is how you may approach it. And by the way, my language is very intentional. So I say may because I'm also not being prescriptive. So I'm going to give you some suggestions, but you do what you think is best. I love these questions. Keep them coming. All right, so this is what, so less prescriptive, by moving and softening descriptive language, remove the daily Scrum question. So we just went over that. Great. So what do we do instead? Any suggestions? If we didn't do the 3 questions, what would we do? Any thoughts?
We tracking towards a sprint goal?
Yep. And so here's some hints. So this is what the Scrum guy says. The purpose of daily Scrum is to inspect progress towards a sprint goal. So yes, thank you. Adapt to sprint backlogs as necessary, adjusting upcoming planned work. So I'll highlight a couple items here. So inspect progress and adjusting. So that's what the Scrum guide says the daily Scrum is about. Any thoughts on that? Anything, if you were to write it, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I'm inspecting the progress towards the sprint goal, and I need to know where my team is in that to get a status, I don't necessarily think the questions were wrong, because the goal is to find out where we are, correct?
Okay, I'm curious though. Well, anybody else want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's going to avoid people talking about risks. This is what I've seen actually. They just answer the questions, but they don't say, you know what, I'm at a standstill on this one item and I'm waiting for feedback and there's a risk of me completing this and meeting our sprint goal because of this. So I think the teams are not talking about risks and tracking to.
So you think the questions are we're just answering the question as asked, but not diving into why we have some type of hindrance in the progress?
That's what I've seen.
If I can add something, let me know if you guys can hear me. I think
I hear you.
yeah, no. So there's, I guess, the standpoint of the questions that are being asked to the team. And then David, I think is the question of who's really the daily stand-up for, right? Who's the daily stand-up for, which may lead to a different type of conversation. Like who really owns the daily stand-up, right? And I'm just gonna post those questions there because you may be going into that. But like the question is who really owns the daily stand-up and who's the daily stand-up for? So I'm gonna ask those questions so that at least it could help us think a little bit more.
I love that. Thank you. Anybody want to chime in? Who owns the stand-up and who is the stand-up for? Anybody want to add to that? Give your thoughts. And again, I love this as an interactive discussion.
So if the stand-up is for the team to tell us where they are, right? Not necessarily not for the product owner, but for the Scrum team, the developers, then I think the questions are appropriate.
Okay. Sorry. Anybody else want to add to, sorry. Anybody else want to add to who is the daily stand-up for? Any further thoughts on that?
I kind of see it like it's also for the other team members, so they know what's going on with maybe things they're not working so closely on, but at least they know it's progressing.
Okay.
And then obviously, like if there are any risks or dependencies or things that we need to work with another team, assigning it to somebody so that there's somebody that takes ownership of whatever issue the team is facing.
All right, thank you.
Can I add to that question? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
So for me, the reason why I discouraged my team from using the what did I do yesterday, what am I doing today, and if there are any impediments is because I observed that it was more like a reporting meeting. And when it gets to, say, 3 days to the end of the sprint, we don't know where we are. And people start panicking. We might not get this done. So the focus was not on what's left for us to do to get this work items done, but it was more about what have I been doing. So it really didn't contribute to the overall sprint goal. And for the team to coordinate to accomplish the sprint goal and get work items completed on time.
All right, thank you. We'll talk about it further here in a moment.
I have a question. This is Rose.
Sure.
It just remind me of the waterfall meetings, because we usually have meetings not every day, once a week. We can go and give an update and to the project manager for the stakeholders to know where the product is actually at. But it seems to me we're going in that direction.
So you think we're going in that direction with the 3 questions, or we're going in that direction without the 3 questions?
With those questions, it's the questions I think were not that well. You can minimize it, having a status report. Why don't you call it a status report where everybody stands and give the status of what they're doing and how far they have to go? And if they have any issues, then you can say, okay, I'm having this. I don't think I'm going to be able to make this deadline. So it's becoming to be confusing, though.
Okay.
If I can add some, David. So the original intent of the daily stand-up was to have a collaboration space for the teams to actually have a meeting where they can talk to each other, the team members, where they could say, hey, I need your help. This is where I'm at. So when we always ask the question is like, who owns the meeting and who's the team for? The team owns the meeting and this meeting is for the team. And I know we've kind of turned it into a status reporting, unfortunately, type of meeting. The original intent of the daily stand-up was not to be a status report of you tell me where we're at, like who's me, right? Like, no, the original intent was for this to be a meeting where the team members say, hey, look, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm doing, I need your help, I just finished this, you're next, for them to communicate. That's why we always say, if the Scrum Master is out on vacation, does the team still have the daily stand-up? And the answer to that is yes. And if you have a successful daily stand-up where the Scrum Master doesn't even have to show up sometimes because the team is doing it and they're collaborating, obviously there's tools like the team boards and we're talking about what's next. That was really the original intent. When it turns into a status report, unfortunately, that's where we gotta ask the questions, right? And then that's been the different approach that we've been doing. And so
Regina,
how do we get sorry, and I know I'm kind of leading the witness here, my apologies, but how do we get it back to a collaboration, to the original intent, David? That would be my question. How can we take it back to that, right?
I love that, go ahead.
Comment I was going to throw in is just simply, Regina, I could not agree more with what you're saying. As the lead developer on many teams over the years for the bank, that's exactly the way I felt. And sometimes I was at odds with the Scrum Master who felt more of, what it's been, the bank had turned it into. But from a development perspective, and all of my developers, we all wanted exactly what you were saying.
Beautiful. I love this interactive discussion. So I'm glad it's a lively group. All right. Go on to the next slide. So if we look at these teams, we have two teams here. We have Team A and Team B. Which team you think, there's a burn down charts. Which team do you think may need to adjust their sprint backlog? Any thoughts?
Are you sharing your screen?
I thought it was.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, good. So I have a team. So you should see on the screen. It should have a couple burn down charts, and it should have Team A and Team B. And the question is, if you look at this, and these were your teams, if you're a Scrum Master, two teams, for example, which team do you think would need to seriously consider adjusting the sprint goal, the work you committed to for this sprint?
It looks like the B team, but I'm worried if it's a trick question.
And I would throw in that
I would say Team A doesn't seem to be going straight. It's a little bit too curvy.
It should be burning down if it's a burn down chart. And if they're in the middle of the sprint and which it looks like Team B is in the middle of the sprint, but they haven't burned half of the stories, I get to see one of these every day, and it does look a lot like this, particularly in the first half of the sprint. So the answer is it's too soon to tell. That's the real answer. But B looks a little off track, if I had to say.
And I have a different topic of, I know what you mean. Almost most teams are like B in the middle of the sprint. And I do have an answer to that, but that gets a little bit off topic, but I agree with that.
Yeah.
But the idea is
falling off the cliff. We fall off the cliff about 3 days before the end of the sprint. Just it falls off a cliff. Yeah.
Or not to get too much, I'm going to do not to do too much of my own presentation, but not too much off a topic, is the problem with Team B is, in practice, what I see is developers clean all their work. and give QA like 1 or 2 days to do their work. And that is not a healthy team. But the idea here is you really should be trying to close stories on a regular cadence and stick to the burnt down chart as reasonably close as you can. So if I were to look at these two different teams, no trick question, by the way, it's a very simple thing. I would say Team B needs to start asking some serious questions and see what's going on. So this is one of the tools. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, you know, if we're meeting every day, in your first scenario, your first question, they did daily Scrum every day, then it's weird that a team B would be in this status, because what are they doing at that meeting? What are they discussing?
And you can discuss what you did yesterday and today and still have this chart. Because if you don't have a discussion of, because one of the problems with the daily stand-up with those questions, it becomes about the individual versus the team. And one thing I want to do in this presentation is refocus the discussion back, as Regina did a beautiful job, about it being a team delivery and not being a status. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. So what are some causes for adjustment? What cause? So we're in the middle of a sprint, or whenever we're just starting a sprint even. What are some thoughts about cause for adjustment? What may cause you to sit there, you committed to, whatever, 10, 15 stories for a sprint, and you may see, once there you can actually add stories, but typically you remove stories. What are some of the causes for needing to adjust the sprint backlog? Any thoughts?
No, WIP limits they're over their WIP limits.
Okay. Anyone else?
For us, QA lags behind. And so what ends up happening when you show like B is QA lags. And so what we end up doing is we repurpose a couple of developers to help QA bring it back down towards the burn. So that happens to us a lot because we have the ratio of developers to QA is 5-1. And so it's hard for one person. Yeah, I know, that's the face I'm sure she's making. It is, she can't keep up. And sometimes we take 2 or 3 developers off of development and move them over to QA for the remainder of the sprint till we catch up.
All right. Any other thoughts about why you may need to adjust your sprint mid-sprint?
It could be if you're working with another team that's supplying code, like a framework team, and there's been a problem there, that becomes a blocker, right?
Yep.
Right.
So different thoughts. Go ahead.
Adjust because you got new information.
That's one of my favorite sayings. You make a change when we got new information. So one of the things, the dependencies. So gentlemen, I can't see everyone's name on the screen at the moment. If another team sits there that says, I'll give it to you by, this day, and they're not able to, that's one of the changes. Absences. So maybe a team member gets sick, they have a issue in the family or whatnot. Changes in priority. One thing we do talk about and allow, but we could talk about that if you want. I know different people have different philosophies. Can you change priorities in the middle of sprints? That's can always be an interesting topic itself. Work took longer or shorter than anticipated. So usually it almost always takes longer, but I've had situations where it didn't take as long as anticipated. Now, what else? Any other thoughts on this slide? Any other things that would cause us to adjust our sprint backlog?
3 happens to us a lot. Like the VP of something will come in and say, oh, we're doing this now. And so we were running east and now we're running west. And if I had $1, David, for every time I hit number 3 hit our team, then I think I could have a very, very nice lunch.
For
Anyone
the
else?
teams that I've worked on, most developers think they can do something in a very short period of time, and then when they get into it, there's always stuff that comes up and it ends up taking longer than they thought.
Okay. Do you ever tackle those issues during a retro? If that's a regular occurrence, that might be a good retro topic.
Yeah.
On the teams that I've worked on, both of the developers they know that this is a fact of life, that things are always going to take longer. So they're usually in their story pointing, accounting for it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, these these comments might be out of topic for this, but I just wanted to comment that for me, my team, the burn down chart always looks like the one for team B. And every time I bring this up during the retro, the team doesn't see any issue with them having the burn down chart looking that way in the middle of the sprint, or even let's say 1 day to the end of the sprint or 2 days to the end of the sprint. And even management is not bothered by that. They tell me as long as they can deliver something to the customer, they don't really care if the burn down chart, if their team gets things done within a sprint or two. So it's really disturbing.
Okay. And so one suggestion is we can pause, we could talk about, because it is relevant to this topic as well.
Yes.
One thing you could talk about is, you could bring up QA and ask QA, well, since you got these, 10 stories of the last day or the last 2 days, how did that impact your ability to test? Did you miss some tests? Did you have to work extra hours? Did you have to work from, 9 a.m. to midnight? And let the developers hear it. And then if they sit there and say, I couldn't run these tests, I can only do half the tests I planned, or I had to work till midnight, or I had to pull in additional resources, ask the team in this case, you'll mostly focus on developers here, and get their thoughts. Is this how we should, do we want to continue doing this? Is a question you would ask the team and particularly developers. And I hope and I suspect most people sit there and say, no, we don't want to have people working till midnight. Great. So you got developers on board now. We no longer want to look like Team B. Great. Now what can we do now?
So David, I don't know if this is a valid way of doing it, but again, at the bank, on a couple of teams that I've worked on, we had 2 weeks where the developers are writing their code, and then the next 2 weeks they was handed off to do multiple different types of testing. And so development had to be done within that first 2 weeks, but they had all the way to the end as long as they got their stuff done. And then the testers were guaranteed the full 2 week sprint for their testing. So we didn't run into this problem over there.
Okay, well, it sounds like for the most part, you're doing month-long sprints, which is fine. Scrum says you
but
do
by
month-long.
breaking it into 2 and 2, it sort of locked it. You know what I mean? They couldn't run over their 2 week coding time period.
And if that works, that's fine. There's, and one of my favorite things, instead of saying yes or no, is pros and cons. And so I can see pros with that approach, and I can see cons with that approach. But if no one's complaining, beautiful, go for it.
So then the one thought I'm having right now is if management came down and told us, you guys have to complete the whole thing, testing included within the 2 weeks, then of course we would all say, well, I guess we've got the first week for coding and the second week for testing, and we've got to make sure that we stick to that, right?
That's one way of doing it. The ideal answer, which is not always the right answer, but the ideal answer is you would have like a 1 story point story you might be able to complete in a day, give that to testing, and maybe 2 or 3 point story, give them to the following day, then following day after that. And so you incrementally give testing stories that they can test. So so testing is not at the very end, but it's done throughout the sprint as well.
Yep,
so that would be the ideal answer. But I've been in PO multiple years. I know that doesn't always work out that way. But that is the best case, at least for tests for QA, making sure they get their tests and all that. And also, not to dwell too much on this, but also you want developers involved in writing the test cases and making sure that they agree with the test cases the QA is writing. You also want the PO's input as well. This is great conversation. I love this.
One last point I would throw in is that one of the projects I was working on at the bank was automation of testing. They were basically eliminating the QA department at the bank. And they wanted full automation. Well, they really want automation of everything, the coding and the testing. And that's the direction they're going. But we actually wrote code to automate the testing.
But I still feel there's be a role of QA in there, even it might be slightly diminished with automated testing. I still think there'd be plenty of manual test cases to run, especially the very first time.
Yeah, in the bank that I worked at over the last 4 or 5 years, they've fired almost everybody that was in QA.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
But I've been there before and I've seen management approach it like that. Yes. Go ahead.
May I ask something else? So about the environment, like I know when I work in Chicago, sometimes the weather is so bad that you have the snow or nobody can come to work or is something happening with the electricity. Always something is always happening when it comes to the environment. And this is like something that people don't really have control over. So that's one of the things that, how do you adjust that?
I think that falls under to absences, but absence is not for family because of the weather. Or these days and age, just work remote. My favorite answer to all the problems in the world. Work remote. I am keeping an eye on time. Regina, I'm impressed. One of my concerns is we might be going too fast with this. We are taking a lot, which I love. This is a beautiful interactive discussion. Are we doing okay on time, Ali and Regina?
Yes, we still have 36 minutes, including Q&A.
All right.
We have until
Beautiful.
7:30.
All right. Thank you. Keep
Awesome.
going here. So what does a daily stand-up look like now? So you got rid of the questions. What do we do instead? Any thoughts? What do we do instead? If we didn't do the questions, what would we do in a daily stand-up? Any thoughts?
So David, I'll throw in my 2 cents. I like the slide you had before, that I think the purpose of the Scrum is to inspect the progress and adjust as necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So questions that would take us down that path would be my answer.
Okay. Do you have suggestions? So if you were describe what your daily stand-up would look like in this format, would you ask questions, or what would you sit there and prompt the team to do?
I'm here to learn from you, but
okay,
since you're asking the question, my first thought would be, again, as a dev lead type person, I was coding but also leading. One of my primary responsibilities was to help the developers get through whatever type of roadblock or slowdown that they're having. If that meant, so I would need to ask some questions to bring that to the surface. I'm here to help.
Okay.
What can I help you guys with?
All right.
What's causing a
Anyone
problem?
else? Anyone else? If you didn't ask those 3 questions, what do you see doing instead? Just suggestions or thoughts.
The sprint board, seeing how things are tracking toward sprint completion.
Okay. Anyone else?
I was gonna ask, like, does anybody need help?
Okay, you could ask me about, so a general question. Does anybody need help? Sure, good, thank you. Anyone else? All right.
It's a testing team, so we do not ask those questions. We just try to find out where everybody is and how things are going and if people need help. We do not ask those questions.
Okay. I have a question. Do you think in this new format, so you don't have the questions, you may look at the burn down chart, you may sit there and ask a very, very general question. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about in regards to completing our commitments to this sprint? Anybody think that's a good question? Once again, does anyone have anything they want to talk about in regards to completing our sprint commitment?
Nobody will speak.
Yeah. Everybody does.
Well, fair, and I could see that. My answer to that, so I think that's a reasonable question. You could also step it up, doing incremental steps. But I think in some ways, if you did that and you let them not speak, and there's a question: are you willing to let them fail? And so if you did that, and you miss a story or two, then we'll go back to what I mentioned earlier. In the retro, you go, okay, we had committed to, you know, whatever X, Y, and Z. We committed to these 10 stories or completing this concept. And we didn't. What happened? Okay, so that happened. Okay, why didn't that come up earlier? So you ask these questions in the retro, and you get the sense of the team being responsible and the team needing to speak up and the team needing to engage. And I think if you do that 2 or 3 sprints, the team will start to speak up. And I think they will start saying the right things and start engaging. And I've been around enough that I know that if you start doing that, the first sprint or two, especially if you complete half the stories, for example, it depends on the environment. A lot of environments, corporate environments, they sit there and say, what's going on with this team? This team is not performing well. And to some degree, that actually is semi-true, but usually it discourages change and innovative change as well. But I think that's a reasonable way of starting this. There are other ways, but that's one way I would consider. Anybody have thoughts about what question you might kickstart the daily stand-up with? So I gave one example. Any other thoughts? Is that a reasonable question? Once again, my question is, go ahead.
I think we should have the environment to welcome, no matter what the issues people have, to be able to listen to the person. The reason people don't jump in and say, yes, I have this problem, it's probably because they're not feeling comfortable. They're not really feeling at ease to go ahead to open up and ask a question and say, okay, I need help. Being able to ask, I need help. Is there anybody familiar with this problem before? Have you encountered this problem? Or did you resolve it? I'm open.
And there could be multiple reasons people are not comfortable. One reason, going back to this deck, is that they're not used to having those kind of conversations. If you think about it, it's easy to say what I did yesterday, what I did today. And maybe I have a blocker, but I won't say that in front of the entire group. It's not on the board, so I'll say no blockers. But offline, going back to the lead developer, offline I ask the lead developer for questions and all that. So I could see that kind of culture being established again through these daily questions. But I think if you sit there and start putting up the board and saying this is a team commitment, and the team includes QA, by the way, and developers and QA, this is the team commitment. Do we feel we're still on track? Maybe we're halfway through the sprint. Looking at the stories, you could bring up the board and the stories on them. You could do the burn down chart. You could just bring up the stories themselves, which ones are done, in progress, not started, and say, okay, do you think, just eyeballing it, are we on track to it? And two, people's comment on this call, a fair number of people will sit there and stay quiet and silent about it. And I think one of the tricks is to be comfortable with that. And also, let's talk about risk with ourselves. Willing to sit there and let the team fail and not complete their sprint commitment, to start creating a conversation of why didn't we complete this sprint commitment? And to sit there and start reinforcing, hey, this is about the team and team responsibilities and team delivery and team commitments. So I think if we're willing to let the team struggle with that and be uncomfortable, I think we would, over time, generate the discussions we want to see. So that's my thoughts on that. So, I would do a very simple question, as I mentioned, are we on track to it? And I would let people be uncomfortable with it. Now, if no one speaks up, I'm a risk taker. I would sit there and I'll let that go 2 or 3 days. And then, as I sit there and look down at the burn down chart, I'll sit there and say, we're not closing stories. I'm a little concerned we're not doing. Is anybody else concerned that we're not going to make this sprint commitment? And let people, people might answer a yes or no question a little easier than an open-ended question. Yeah, okay, why? So, and then you choose 2 or 3 people who are quiet. Okay, what's your thought? Why do you think we're on track? No. Okay, why don't you think? So you get people who normally are quiet to speak up as well. And so you're building in some way a brand new culture within the team. Again, if you go back to just doing these 3 questions, It's very easy to do it. You're giving a status call to the Scrum Master. Status call's over. It's a 10-minute meeting. We're done. Yay, we can go do something else now. Versus a daily stand-up is instead like, how are we doing as a team? Are we going to make our commitments? If we're not going to make them, because what changes do we have? And I love the comment earlier, you know, what is on the horizon? We have a dependency board, a risk board, and we can talk about those if those need to be brought up in a daily stand-up. But I would defer to the team if they feel a need to bring those up as well. Related,
David,
number two.
I do ask
Sure.
David about, you know, I don't always ask about the sprint. I'm at every stand-up, and we have actually all 4 of our teams have the same stand-up because there's interdependencies. So we're all in the same stand-up, and we know who's holding who up, and they're right there. We don't have to have another call to get infrastructure because they're on the call. So we always, you know, hold people accountable. And we have a sort of a culture where when we don't just talk about blockers, they'll just say Ross is blocking me, or the vendor is blocking me. Like, we have that kind of culture. We call each other out. And I always go last. I like to hear everybody talk first, but I always go last. I even tell them what I'm working on. Like, I'm working on a report for the C-suite tomorrow. You know, what do you want me to tell them about this database that we're decommissioning? Can I tell them that it's going to be done? Because you guys are going to deliver that. I'm just the messenger. So I do that in my sprints. I ask about the bigger goal, and I don't just say, are you going to finish the story? Now, when we do the sprint planning, I do say, is this going to roll over? Because, you know, I need to know that. But I don't talk about that in the stand-up, what being finished or not. I save that conversation for sprint planning, you know, so I can decide if something has to stay or roll, or we got our estimate wrong. I don't address that in the stand-up.
And do you feel that is working? So you mentioned 4 teams together. That'd be kind of interesting. So I have questions about that, maybe a little bit off topic, but
Mhm.
but um, but if you take a step, so if you go back to be honest with you, bring 4 teams together like that. I almost wonder if that's like a scrum of scrums or something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if a date.
Yeah, we do it every day. Yeah, we do.
Okay.
We do it every day. Yeah.
Is your team, let me ask you this, is your team comfortable enough to sit there and raise concerns about that approach during a retro? If they didn't like it or didn't think it's the right approach, is there an environment and culture that allows them to say so?
Yeah, there would be we have a retro board that's anonymous. I put a board up that they can log in and say something at any time during the sprint. And so they can log concerns or pluses anytime along the sprint. So it's wide open. They could say, I don't like this, or I don't even like the way we're having this meeting, or, you know, they do that. I think we're pretty comfortable with each other. It's a small company,
Okay.
so
Okay.
we hold each other accountable. I think that's what happens in the daily stand up, and in the retro. My team doesn't like to retro and demo so much because they're swamped, and they're like, I don't have time to prepare a demo. So I give incentives for demos, but it's like pulling teeth. That's the hard part for me. When you have a meeting about that, David, I want to be here.
You know, what's funny is my personal opinion, the demo is the most important metric out there. Forget any other metric, the demo is the most important metric.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
All right. So what about the question? Does everyone, if you did a daily stand-up, do you think everyone would need to speak up?
You know, on some of the teams that I worked on, that someone would raise an issue and a lot of other developers would want to jump in and try to solve it. And then usually either me or the Scrum Master would say, okay, we're not going to be able to solve it in the next 5-10 minutes. Let's have a side. We're going to have to do that after the call, right? Otherwise, other people won't get to speak. You'll just have 2 people working through the problem on this call, the stand-up call.
We do a post Scrum for that, so like everybody will give the update, and if they want to like go more in detail, they'll just say we can post Scrum it, and then a smaller group might say, or everybody might say.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I don't believe people should be solutioning on the call, because as your point is, you could easily go down a rabbit hole and take, you know, from a 10-minute or 15-minute stand-up, usually take 20, 30 minutes and just have 2 people talking. Yeah, I don't think that provides the value we're seeking in a daily stand-up either.
I agree with that. What I do is I call it the after party. And as you're taking your turn, you can say, I need Steve in the after party to talk about the firewall. And so I just make a note, and then we let everybody talk, and then I say, okay, we're gonna talk about the firewall. Anybody doesn't want to hear about the firewall, see you tomorrow. If you want to see about the firewall, stick around, and then they have the choice to drop or stay. And if it's a dependency for them too, like some people will stay. And then we grill Steve. That's not really his name. There is no Steve. I'm just using Steve as an example. Thanks for being recorded. But Steve, Steve will stay and get the grilling, and then we'll stay as long as we need to. So it's an open-ended call. Our stand-up is always like 7 to 10 minutes, but the after party can be a little longer if there's something broken.
Right, thank you. So I actually think it's okay if not everyone speaks. And whether or not that's a good thing, that's actually a team unique question. Is that okay if Bob, making up names again, Bob, Billy, Scott, Steve, and all that, if they don't speak and they don't speak for 3 or 4 days, that's fine. And then again, if you go to the end of the sprint, you look at the demo and things like that, and things are now respected, or we didn't complete half the work, and maybe the people that didn't speak up didn't do the stories they were assigned. That's a beautiful topic. No accusations or anything. It's a single team. What is it we can do? So you ask a broad question, what can we do together? And sit there and say, why didn't this come up? Again, not calling out anybody, why didn't this come up mid-sprint if it looked like it was going to be completed? So I don't think everyone needs to speak in a daily stand-up. And I believe in letting the team, one of the best ways the team can learn is if you let them fail. And so if you do it and you let them, go 2 or 3 days or 4 days, and you realize, oh my God, this big, huge issue hasn't been resolved yet. We knew about 3 days ago. Okay, why wasn't that brought up earlier? And you can take some of these conversations offline as well. Is brainstorming on changes a good idea? So your daily stand-up, looks like you're not going to be able to meet the sprint goal. Is it worthwhile talking about in a daily stand-up what you need to do to meet or to adjust what that goal is? In this case, I'm defining the goal as simply the stories committed to. Is it a good idea in a daily stand-up to, as a group think, to discuss what stories you need to add or remove?
Yeah,
We don't normally do that unless the VP shows up and says, you have to do this. Then we have that call. We go like, okay, VP says we're going to do this. And so what are we going to drop? Because we have to do this. So who would like to do it? And what can we drop? And then I can go back and tell the VP, okay, we're going to do your thing, but we're going to drop these 2 other things so we can do your thing. And then I go deliver the bad news. That is my Indian name. It's Patricia Bear of Bad News. And I'm happy to do it. So that's, we don't really have to, I'd say we call it brainstorming. I'd say we call it troubleshooting, maybe.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree. I think as part of being agile, it's having that adaptability. And, if something more important comes up, then yeah, we should be able to turn, say no to something else. I did want to say just one thing on the previous point. Sorry to backtrack, but I don't know. I feel like the stand-up is like, for me, it's like such an important meeting. It's like I always really try to be there. And I love hearing from everybody because I kind of see it like the checkpoint, like how is also the team doing? Like sometimes even just by their voice, you can kind of tell if somebody's struggling or if they're having a bad day. So if somebody wasn't talking for like 3 or 4 days, I think I would be concerned that, they're not speaking up. Like I do see how the retro, it's then the moment to talk about it, but the stand-up is most likely the only time that everybody in the team is there. And it should be quick, right? So I don't know. I don't see much value in like not hearing from everybody, even if it's just to say, yeah, it's great. It's going great.
Okay, so what you would like to see for your particular team is that everyone speaks. So you do a round robin. But what question are they answering? There's a question,
Yeah,
how go ahead.
Yeah, we mainly do like the standard that I didn't know until today wasn't the standard anymore. But pretty much we just say like, this is what I'm working on.
And if I have risks or blockers, like the team is really good about bringing up any issues they might have. They might mention like if they have a doctor appointment or just, you know, anything that the team might need to know. If there's maybe some meeting that they're going to attend, then, you know, we'll give an update later in the day. Like it's just a day for like a moment for everybody to like, okay, come together. This is what all the different pieces are doing, you know, and have a great day, pretty much.
All right. All right. Thank you. What about your teams? Is this something you will consider for your teams? So we can talk about this interactively, but anybody want to add to that? Is there something you may want to consider for your teams?
David, I would say yes, but I'm a big believer in gaining consensus. And I got some pushback on that on a call last week. Some people don't believe in it, but if the team was, if we laid out the pros and cons and the kinds of points that you brought up, and people in general agreed with it, I think the team would go with it.
Okay.
But
Anyone else?
if the majority, you know, didn't agree, then we might have a problem.
And then I would challenge them is how are the series questions adding value?
Yeah.
So I know we have previous presentations where Scrum Masters thought they did, and great if they add value to the teams. But I think that's a part of it. So I think, you know, maybe in that case, I see beginning teams maybe find value in it or find comfort in it. But I suspect as teams get more mature, get more comfortable, I do suspect that they would want to go to away from the 3 questions is kind of my perspective. Anyone else, what do you think? How do you think your teams react if you try to do this with your teams? If you get rid of the 3 questions. Any thoughts? And what pros and cons do you see? Anyone?
I think one pro is it's predictable, and my team likes that kind of predictability.
Okay.
And in terms of letting everybody talk, we don't even, like, if we have a visitor, we used to have one of our people drop in occasionally, and he would have to give his status too. So he stopped coming because he thought with the V or C in front of his name, he didn't have to do that. And I was like, oh, everybody gives status. This is our update. If you're here, you got to answer the questions. We'll let you last. But I even held them. Yeah,
I'm gonna add that to my toolbox. You know, David, what are you gonna do if someone keeps similar setup? I'm gonna add that. It's like make them answer the same questions. All right, man, I
Yes,
love it.
they
See,
have to.
I'm learning from this as well. I got a new tool in my toolbox now. All right. Any obstacles if you tried to introduce your team to it? Would management actually push who in your company, and maybe it's the team members themselves, who in your company would actually raise concerns if you did this?
I think the developers on my team wouldn't want to talk because I've sometimes in Monday I'll go, so let's talk about what you did over the weekend, what movies you saw, what books you read, you know, what did you do for fun over the weekend? Did you have a good meal? And they're just like, so I worked on 8736 and I'm putting it to QA today. And I'm just like, I could have said anything and they'll just still answer the questions, David. So I'm stuck. That's why I'm here, is I don't care whether I ask those questions or not. They're gonna answer. They're gonna say those 3 answers.
Okay. So it looks like you might have a long path ahead of you trying to do this.
Yeah.
Is anybody concerned that management would raise concerns about this?
You know, at the big company that I worked for before, there's a whole group that tells the Scrum Masters what the process should be. And so in a big company like that, I think that that's one area of concern.
And I'm working on a company right now that does the exact same thing. If you didn't ask those questions, the Scrum Masters will get in trouble.
Yeah, resign now. That's just go ahead and resign now. That's the case.
Karen, you got your hand up. All right, love it.
I was gonna say, I think my environment is so different because we always try to introduce new things and get everybody involved. And I think one thing that we do that has stuck is in the middle of the week, like today, Wednesday, we do something called a deck meeting, and it's a little PowerPoint, and it starts off with hot topics. So we allow like the leaders, the project managers, or scrum masters, whoever, if the stakeholders come, they'll give an update of whatever they think needs to be shared with the team. And then we don't specifically ask people for statuses or any information. We just go through with different things. But one thing that has come from this meeting is the last slide, it's like 5 or 6 slides. We do a little trivia thing. And what I notice it does, it kind of gives us an opportunity to check the energy of everybody on the team in the middle of the week. Because people tend to, because it's relaxing, like today, one of the ladies who was running it for somebody who was out, we always have a backup. So she asked the question, what was the first, when did IBM, no, not IBM, who created the first commercial mouse? Right? Who created a mouse that was commercial? And so people were like, I don't know. People said IBM, somebody said this, somebody said that, whatever, right? And so everybody tries to engage in it. And we'll ask questions like, what's the flower that's associated with Memorial Day? Different things that's going on at the time. And what I've noticed since we started doing this is people get an opportunity to kind of relax a little bit, shake off, and at the end of that little 5 or 6 questions at the end, the last thing, the question from one of the managers, myself, or one of the other team leads would be, is there anything else that anybody want to talk about? And then you might hear somebody say something like, I was doing this with my tests and blah, 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 blah. And and somebody will say, oh, well, this is, I found this, or do you know this? And it gives a different feel to a quote unquote status. We do end up getting updates from it, the managers, but it's not the same as if it's a formal Scrum meeting Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, right? That Wednesday meeting, we started at 10, it runs for an hour, and it's just a different feel because we make it a different feel. So I think, and managers come into it and they have to contribute too, and they laugh and joke, and I think it would be good to, so I don't see any pros and cons, and I don't necessarily see obstacles because we get what we want, but it does not pay as if it's like a formal quote unquote ceremony. So that's a good way, I think, too.
You know what, Karen, I really like the idea that you brought up there. I'm thinking about what happened on our team. Our team took a vote and said, we want Fridays off. But now that I'm hearing the suggestion from you, I'm thinking your idea is really good, actually. Because what happened is, unlike what I think it was Patricia might have said earlier, where we would all like to have a little bit of icebreaker time at the beginning of the call. And where I worked, the kibosh was sort of thrown down on that on some of the teams. They're like, we don't have time. We got 15 minutes. We got to get through this, and we got to get everybody to speak. So between David, your point, and Karen, I think there's a couple of good ideas here.
All right, thank you. So quick summary, we're rushing to the end. Don't make daily stand-ups a status meeting where the teams report to the Scrum Master. Nobody likes micromanagement. Treat it as a team discussion. Let the discussion flow. Over time, it become natural. I think one of the things we were talking about this is the team may not know what to say. If you actually sit there and open it up to a more natural discussion, like how are we going to do? Are we on target to meeting the sprint goal? At first, you probably have deers, they won't know how to react to it. They won't know how to answer it. And it goes back to my earlier point, is like, be comfortable with silence, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Let them be uncomfortable in the beginning. And another thing is avoid that discussions during a ceremony. I think it's a great transition. I do suggest people do give it a try. The focus on the DSU is to check if the team is on target delivering the commits, and if not, what changes to be made, including removing the stories. I did have one person on this top call mention that they do regularly remove stories. I've had situations before where someone, again, a VP, will come in and add a story, but the team would feel comfortable actually moving a story, and that's never a pretty sight. And number 4 is kind of interesting, is encouraging self-regulation. Self-regulation as far as how is the time used, but also self-regulation, are we having the right discussions as well? Are we on track? We as a team own this meeting, as we as a team need to look at the board And we as a team need to make sure that we're comfortable that we're going to meet our commitment. And if not, open discuss what changes need to occur. Any other questions, comments? This is our QA session. I can give out this deck if people want. There's some takeaways, so we'll do a QA session at the end.
Can I add
do
one more
suggest.
thing? Can I add one
Sure.
more thing with the slide before? One thing that we've noticed with this quote unquote deck meeting, we call it, it's run by the team members. And they run it for, one person runs it for an entire month every Wednesday. And because of that, they can come up with the trivia. They can come up with whatever they want to come up with for us to discuss on this last slide. And like I said, we don't really do like a status, but people do train a little bit of their statuses or whatever is going on because the conversation is so fluid. And I think it's because it doesn't start at 9:15 like the normal ones. It starts at 10. We give it an hour, so everybody blocks off an hour. So they start later that day. They're not starting the normal time. And it's a little more relaxed because we're laughing throughout the meeting with different things that people say, but yet we're getting information. And so I think if you can turn this meeting into something where the team is involved, because none of the leaders run the meeting, we let them run the meeting and ask the questions. They ask us, well, did you check on this? And did you check on that? And so we get an opportunity to give whatever status we have to give as well. But it's just, it's a different feel than the other days of the week when one of the leaders are running the actual quote unquote status meeting.
I love that. I love variation. So that's good. I love the mini icebreaker too. Thank you.
And somebody else running it too. Thanks, Karen, for mentioning that. That's also a good idea.
I was comment on that because I've actually had plenty of developers, and QA to a less extent, but developers can significantly push back on being asked to run the daily stand-up. So, but I still encourage you to make the effort. One of the takeaways I do suggest you actually bring up this change by scrum.org and how you may be able to implement this within your organization. I'll suggest you bring this up to your team and ask the team whether or not they want to give this a try as well. A couple of takeaways for you. Here's my contact information. I'll give this deck to Ali. I'll let her spread it out if she wants to. And that's it. So we do a Q&A. Ali, how much time do we have for the Q&A portion?
We have about 5 minutes.
Our own time check, our own time boxing. All right, 5-minute time boxing. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I have a question. So this is off topic of the daily stand-up, but the Scrum guide, they also changed in 2000 to no longer call the event ceremonies. That we should be calling it events. The ceremonies apparently was a bad word. I don't know. I don't remember the reasoning behind it. So every time I'm trying to train everybody, let's get rid of the word ceremony. Let's use events. Let's get rid of grooming and let's use the word refinement, and it just will not stick. I've tried it over and over, so now I'm saying grooming again and I'm saying ceremony again. So
I say ceremonies.
Okay, I'm just going since the Scrum guide changed these things, including the daily stand-up. That's why I thought I would bring it up because.
Well, it goes back to my earlier point. Scrum Guide is missing. Scrum.org is the organization. Scrum.org is missing a PR and marketing team is what they're missing. Because I do this presentation a lot and like no one's heard of it before. I mean, this is 5 years ago.
Yes, they announced it and that was it. And but they didn't market it after that. They did announce the changes, but not everybody went out and read them. Yeah.
Anything else? Questions, comments, concerns?
Will you put up your contact slide one more time?
Sure. I think I might send out the deck, but I'm happy to do that.
Great.
Let's see where we at. Right there.
Yeah.
Let me actually full screen real quick. Oops. Hold on. Try it again. There we go.
Thank you.